The meta for Season 23 of Destiny 2 is what we're talking about in today's video. Bungie just revealed a whole ton of buffs and nerfs coming to Destiny 2. Buff this, nerf that, buff this, nerf that. Bungie is going absolutely crazy out here. But don't worry, we're here to help you make sense of everything that's happening in today's breakdown of the Artifact mod for Season 23. So let's jump right into it. Column 1, perk number 1 is Anti-Barrier Sidearm.
But Lucky, what are the best sidearms in PvE?
I'm glad you asked, because the best sidearms in PvE, if you're going to use Anti-Barrier Sidearm, is going to be the Liminal Vigil, which can roll Headstone and Surrounded. This thing is an absolute beast in PvE and will shred those barriers. Alternatively, if you don't have that, you can use the 7th Seraph Sidearm. It rolls with Surrounded and Demo, and if you don't have either of those sidearms, well, guess what? Now you have something to do for the last week of Season 22. Now moving on to column 2, in row number 1, we have Flame, Fiber, and Freeze. It combines the Solar and Strand and Solar and Stasis Siphon mods into one. There's not too much to say about this, other than it won't be one of our top picks. Remember, you only get to pick 12 options when selecting your artifact mods, so we gotta pick the best ones. Moving on to column number 3 here, we have Flint Striker, which reads Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows grant Radiant, which sounds like it will be pretty good, especially for solar builds. I could definitely see myself equipping this throughout the season and using it with Sunshot, and you could do the same with any other solar weapons that you like. Moving on to the 4th column now, we have Unraveling Orbs. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Strand Weapons Unraveling Rounds. Now, while this might be fun for some Strand builds out there, I don't see this being extremely powerful. Unraveling Rounds currently aren't that crazy in PvE right now, and Bungie hasn't mentioned buffing them, so I think we'll probably go with something else for column number 4. Now let's move on to the next. We've got column 5, the last one in the top row. It's called Horde Shuttle, and it reads Damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a Threadling. Now this one does pair perfectly with the previous perk we talked about, Unraveling Orbs, so I know some Strand Warlocks are going to create a build with this, and I think it'll be some pretty fun builds, but I don't think those are the perk options that I'm going to go with throughout the season. Let's move on down to the second row now. We have Unstoppable Hand Cannons. With Unstoppable Hand Cannons on the menu, that means we're going to be using Sunshot, Fatebringer, Zali's Bane. One thing to note as well is that Zali's Bane is actually getting its reload bug fixed. Bungie finally addressed it and they're fixing it, so that's pretty exciting. Moving on to column number 2, we have Kindling Trigger, which is Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. One thing that'll be interesting here is just exactly how many Scorched attacks does this apply, because if it applies enough that you can use a perk like Incandescent and get ignitions off of just one kill, this could actually be pretty crazy, but we won't know just how powerful this is until we actually get it in game. The next perk in column 3 now reads Torch. While Radiant, deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by Strand and Stasis debuffs. That sounds really good, and the only question we need to have with this is how long is this going to last, because a buff stacking on top of Radiant's already 10% buff could be really good and could actually create some really optimal DPS builds. This could be a good perk for boss DPS, so definitely looking forward to that one. Moving on to the 4th column now, we have Pillar of Ice. Killing an encased combatant spawns stasis crystals. Personally, that one doesn't really seem all that powerful to me. I'm sure people will use this for stasis builds, but even still with Pillar of Ice, I don't think this is going to make any stasis build like crazy powerful, but definitely a fun addition to any stasis build out there. Next up in column 5, row number 2, we have Hail the Storm. Shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage. Shattering a stasis crystal releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. Again, just like the row above this one for Strand, this one looks like it pairs really well for stasis builds with the previous perk option Pillar of Ice, and it honestly doesn't look that bad overall, but there are better options in column 5, and we'll only get to pick 2 out of the 5, so I feel like this one is definitely not as powerful, as potent as some of the other ones we're about to get to in just a moment. Now let's move on to row number 3, and in column 1 we have Unstoppable Bow. Now this will obviously have to directly compete against Unstoppable Hand Cannon for your artifact selections out there, and personally I'm going to go with Unstoppable Hand Cannon over Unstoppable Bow 9 times out of 10, especially because if you're using something like Wish Ender, which has built-in anti-intrinsic anti-barrier, that means that you can't use Unstoppable Bow with Wish Ender, but Sunshot, for example, doesn't have any anti-champion perk, so you can use Unstoppable Hand Cannon with Sunshot. So personally, I'm going to be choosing Hand Cannon over Bow. Let me know if you're going to do the same. Now moving on to column number 2, we have Blast Radius. Rapid final blows with rocket launchers and grenade launchers grant armor charge. Now the rocket launcher part of this doesn't seem that interesting. I mean, we're not trying to clear ads with our rocket, right? But the grenade launcher part is very interesting. Forbearance is about to go crazy with this perk. Forbearance will easily get you those rapid final blows with chain reaction, and that's going to get you massive armor charge stacks, it would seem. That looks really exciting and very interesting to me. Moving on to the next column now. In column 3, we have Heart of the Flame. Casting your solar super grants nearby allies radiant and increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. All right, now that sounds absolutely nuts. We don't know just how much damage this is going to stack on top of supers, but could you imagine your Celestial Nighthawk getting a substantial buff because you're standing near near 5 other teammates. That could be very crazy. And it wouldn't just work with Celestial Nighthawk, you could also use this with Pyro Gale Gauntlets, or if you're a Warlock out there, you could probably use it in your well. All 3 options sound very enticing and very exciting. Looking forward to that one for sure. Now on to the 4th column. In the 3rd row, we have Revitalizing Blast. Causing damage with a solar ability weakens champions and bosses for a short duration. I mean, do I even have to say anything? That's going to be amazing, right? Debuffing champs and bosses without having to use a Void class or Tractor Cannon. That's always really good inside Destiny 2. Just think about how powerful this could be if you're on your Warlock using Sun Bracers, throwing crazy solar nades everywhere, or if you're on your Hunter throwing knives, or even Titans throwing their Baby Hammer, assuming that Baby Hammer isn't just completely destroyed after Bungie's nerf goes live. But either way, this is actually a really exciting perk, and definitely one that I'll be selecting. The next perk we're about to talk about, though, is probably the craziest perk of them all. It is Rays of Precision. While radiant, solar precision final blows cause combatants to ignite. If you didn't just shit a brick out there after I read that, then you don't understand Destiny 2. This perk is about to go so unbelievably hard when it comes to ad clear that I don't even know what to think about this perk. Imagine you're using a solar machine gun, just mowing down ads. If you're radiant, every headshot kill you get is going to cause an ignition. That's going to be unbelievable. This is going to be a must-have perk. You're going to want to use this 5th column perk probably the whole entire season. Now let's move on to the 4th row, where we're going to talk about Overload auto rifles. Before I do though, make sure you subscribe to the channel and smash that like button. I appreciate it. The best auto rifles in PvE for Overload are going to be Necrochasm, Quicksilver, Rufus Fury. These are all such good options already in the game, but keep in mind that Bungie is giving a plus 10% buff to auto rifles, allowing them to do 10% more damage to red bar enemies starting next season. So auto rifles will be even more powerful, which is looking very exciting, especially for my Rufus Fury. My role has Demo and Paracausal Affinity. It's crafted and has the enhanced perks, and this bad boy will be mowing down enemies like crazy next season. The next perk we're talking about comes in column number 2, and it's called Origin Perk Specialization. Origin Perk Specialization 1. It improves the benefits provided by the Sundering, Nano Munitions, and Nanotech Tracer Rocket Origin traits. Now the first 2 Origin traits mentioned there, the Sundering and Nano Munitions, are both new to the game, so we'll have to see just how strong they are, and if Origin Perk Specialization 1 actually benefits them enough to be worth it. So we'll have to put that one on hold for now. Moving on to the next column though, we have Origin Perk Specialization 2, which improves the benefits provided by Noble Deeds, Unsated Hunger, Head Rush, and Dragon's Vengeance Origin traits. Now these are all the seasonal origin traits, so there's probably nothing too special here, although I will say that we don't know what Dragon's Vengeance is. That is the new origin trait for the seasonal weapons coming out in season 23, so we'll have to wait and see just how strong it is. Now let's move on to the next one, which is the 4th column, 4th row perk, Overload Rocket Launchers. Do I even need to explain what Overload Rocket Launchers does? You shoot your rocket, you stun the overload, it's beautiful, right? Well, maybe not so much, because technically if you have to shoot the rocket to stun the overload, it can be a little bit wasteful for the ammo economy. I think what people will end up doing this season more often than not is stunning the overload with like their auto rifle, for example, and then shooting their rockets and allowing things like Wolfpack rounds, or maybe even the new Dragon's Breath perk to cause damage over time and repeatedly stun that overload. For those reasons, I think that people will enjoy overload rockets in season 23, but we'll see, only time will tell. Moving on to the next perk that absolutely everyone is going to use when they try to solo the new dungeon, and that comes in column 5. It's called Solo Operative. While you are the only member of your fire team, you deal increased damage to all combatants. I believe this is 15 to 20%. I tried looking this one up in the Destiny 2 data compendium to see the exact percentage of damage that this increases for you as a solo player, but the information wasn't there. I believe it's 15 to 20%. If you do know the answer, be sure to comment down below, and I'll drop a heart on one of those comments with the correct information. But even still, whether it's 15 or 20%, this is going to be a must-have perk when soloing the new dungeon, because that increase to damage output saves you so much time in both clearing ads, champions, majors, and even the bosses. This was historically one of the best artifact perks ever, and I'm very excited to see it make its return. Now let's move on to the 5th and final row here. With column number 1, we have Overload Pulse Rifles. Pulse Rifles have historically been terrible in PvE, aside from maybe Graviton Lance, but with season 23, they're getting a 12.5% damage increase against red bar enemies, meaning that ad clear with these is going to be very good, and you're also going to have the ability to stun overload champions with them. I still think I'm going to use auto rifles over pulse rifles, but if you're a big pulse rifle rifle guy and you want to use them inside PvE for stunning those Overload champions, you're going to want to use stuff like Graviton Lance, the Smite of Moraine, or maybe even the Insidious Pulse Rifle. These are some of the best pulse rifle options in PvE. And now let's move on to the next column here with the perk called From Whence You Came. Increases ability damage to taken and scorn combatants. This is going to be a must-have perk for this season. Simple as that. We're going to be fighting a ton of taken and scorn. Likely those are going to be the enemy types in the dungeon. On top of that, they might also be the seasonal enemy types in whatever seasonal activity we're doing, which means that this perk is going to feel amazing when your abilities absolutely mow through the taken and scorn enemies. So definitely select this on your artifact mod. And just as a side note, if I'm wrong, just delete this video. If I'm wrong, you saw nothing. You saw nothing. Delete this video, you saw nothing. Now moving on to the third column, we're going to be talking about the perk Wished into Being. While your super is nearly fully charged, ability final blows spawn orbs of power. Wearing the Season of the Wish armor decreases super amount threshold. This sounds like it could be really good because obviously who doesn't want to make more orbs of power? But a lot of times when you're using any of these solar builds on Titan Hunter or Warlock, you're going to have the Gauntlet mod on, which makes orbs of power from getting ability kills anyways. So more than likely this perk won't be a necessary one, but it does look interesting and we'll put it in the might be good column. And now let's move on to the fourth column perk here, which is Dragon's Bite. Breaking a combatant's shield with a strand or stasis weapon has a chance to suspend or freeze that combatant. Wearing Season of the Wish armor increases this chance. All right, now this one just sounds absolutely busted, but not for PvE. In PvP, if this actually works, this is going to be crazy. If you break a combatant's shield with a strand or stasis weapon, they're going to get suspended or frozen. If that's the case, then everyone's going to be running around with a full set of Season of the Wish armor, spraying immortals and spamming conditional finalities, because even if you didn't actually kill the enemy, just by breaking their shields, you have a chance of suspending or freezing them, which basically means you're going to win that gunfight. If this does actually work in PvP, this is going to be a must-have perk that everyone's going to want to equip whenever going in the Crucible. If it doesn't work in PvP, you're not going to want to use this in PvE at all. This does not sound good. There aren't that many shielded combatants in PvE, and even if there were, you would have to use a strand or stasis weapon to break that shield, which doesn't really add up or make any sense in my opinion. I don't think this will be good in PvE, but again, if it works in PvP, pray for the Crucible. Now moving on to the very last perk, column 5, row number 5, Argent Ordnance. If you've made it this far into the video, you're an absolute legend. Comment down below, I made it to the end, give me a cookie for a free cookie. Argent Ordnance is going to be a crazy perk to use. It reads, firing a rocket launcher consumes 1 stack of armor charge, granting increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow your rocket launcher. So this is going to be really good for certain types of rocket launchers. I'm talking about you, Envious Assassin rockets, most especially Cold Comfort, which can get 4 in the magazine. It's not going to work with auto-loading rockets, and it's not going to work with a rocket that you would swap like Apex Predator, but it will work extremely well for rockets that can get multiple rockets in the magazine, because each time you fire one of those rockets, it's going to consume 1 stack of armor charge and give you a boost to damage. And then finally, when you do run out of rockets in the magazine, you'll get a boost to reload speed. That's going to be really, really good. Definitely looking forward to Argent Ordnance. Now that we've gone through every single perk in all the columns for Season 23, I'm going to give you my full selections of exactly what I'm going to pick after I've unlocked them all, that is. In column 1, I'm going to pick Anti-Barrier Sidearm, Unstoppable Hand Cannon, and Overload Auto Rifles. And remember, you get 12 picks, so those are my first 3. In column number 2, I'm going to pick Kindling Trigger and From Whence You Came. In column number 3, I'm going to pick Flint Striker, Torch, and Heart of the Flame. That brings my perk counter up to 8 now. Jumping into the 4th column, I'll be picking Revitalizing Blast and Overload Rocket Launchers. And then moving into the very last column, I actually have 3 here that I have to choose. Unfortunately, I'm only going to be able to pick 2, so I'm going to have to rotate from time to time. The 2 main ones I'm going to be going with are Rays of Precision and Argent Ordnance. However, if I ever go into an activity solo, I will obviously equip Solo Operative, which means that I will either have to remove Rays of Precision or have to remove Argent Ordnance, and I'll base that entirely on the encounter, the weapons that I'm using. Like for example, Rays of Precision is really good for a machine gun, so I would keep that on if I was trying to use a machine gun, and Argent Ordnance is obviously designed for rocket launchers, so if I'm trying to use a rocket in that solo activity, then I would use Argent Ordnance and Solo Operative, basically just making my decision on what weapons need to be used in the encounter. And that's it. That's the meta for Season 23 in terms of the most powerful artifact mods and weapons that go along with them, in my opinion. Obviously, there's going to be some new weapons, and there's going to be some things being changed, some new perks in the game, which will obviously mix up these opinions a little bit, but I think it's good to go into the new season with a sort of loose vision of what can happen. And also, if you don't have any of these weapons or exotic armor pieces now, then it gives you something to do for the last week, because certainly everything that I've mentioned in this video will be quite powerful next season. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. And if you're feeling thirsty out there, make sure to use code LUCKY10P to save some money on G Fuel. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch and Kick. I go live all the time playing Destiny 2. Lastly, make sure you're following me on on X, Instagram, and TikTok, where I deliver Destiny 2 news to you daily. I appreciate all the followers out there.